So let's go ahead and get into Illustrator. If we go ahead and go to File, Open, we'll be able to open our line weight file that we just created. And we will notice that it is a blank canvas, and that's because all the line work that we did was pretty far away from the origin in Rhino. If your workspace doesn't look like this, I want you to go up to Window, Workspace, and Essentials Classic. And I think the only difference is that the Essentials Classic comes with Libraries tool. So I want to make sure that you have these four up here: Color, Properties, Links, and Layers. And if any of those aren't here, you can find it like Layers, Properties, so on and so forth. So if we zoom out, we're actually going to see that the line work made its way down here. You might have to play with the scale exporting in Rhino to get this right, but basically what we're going to do is just drag all of it up so that it's all on the same working plane. And we also want to scale it to a proper size. So if I Control A or left click and select everything, we want to make sure actually first that our artboard is a good size. So if I go to Document Setup up here, I can go to Edit Artboards. You just want to make sure that it's between like 12 and 24 inches. The smaller the canvas, the more pixelated it'll be, but certainly the smaller the file size will be. So let's go ahead and make this 12 and 12. And now we're going to select rather, all of this stuff, and we're going to see how it looks on this canvas. So we can see it actually fits pretty well. If we wanted to scale it up or down, we could certainly do that. It looks kind of weird as a square simply because our Rhino viewport was more rectangular. So if you'd like, you can actually go to, maybe we should make this 18 by 12, and then we can have a nice like 2:3 ratio. I think that looks pretty good. So if we go ahead and hit Control A, we can scale it till it's about the size that we want it. So if I drag it back down on here, if it locks and it doesn't let you drag it any further, it's because things are going to fall off the drawing area. And basically what that means is it can't go past this point because this line at the very bottom is going to fall off the artboard if we do. So what we can do alternatively, we want to make sure that we're still scaling everything. So we're just going to drag this off to the side and then continue our scaling process. So we'll see how this looks. The way that I'm zooming in and out so quickly is just hitting Control plus and Control minus. If you have stuff selected, it'll go towards the center point of the thing, whereas if you don't have anything selected, it'll just zoom in where you're at on the screen. Also, if you hit Control 0, that'll just fill up the entire window with the artboard. So a couple small things there. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. So it looks something like that. I think that starts to fill out the board pretty nicely, maybe even a little bit smaller. I might have overshot it. Oops. All right, I can dig this for sure. Actually, we probably want to put it back on this corner, and then we can. Maybe it was better centered. I don't know. Just play around with it and see what looks good to you. So the first thing that we want to do, we made this Make 2D with everything together to use as a reference layer, and I said that during the Rhino part of this tutorial. So what I want to do is basically select all of the stuff that's on the artboard. Don't select any of the individual things that we did. And I want you to go to Edit, let's see, or no, sorry, Object, Livepaint, and Make. Alternatively, you can hit Alt Control X. And basically what that's going to do is convert it into a group, but it maintains all of kind of the colors and the things that you've set up beforehand. So if I wanted to make all of this black, I could go to our stroke over here, just make sure all of these are 0, and change this to maybe like 0.5. What that's going to do is basically just give us a reference that we can align all of the stuff that we're doing past this point to. So if I go ahead and drag this up here, let's make a new layer by going over here and clicking this plus, and we'll drag it onto this layer and put the layer at the bottom, and we'll call it Reference Line Work. And we don't want to do anything to this layer, like we literally just want to reference it, so we're going to lock it. And that should be pretty good. So the next kind of set of things that I'm going to do, I'm going to fast forward through this part. Basically, I'm going to align everything that's on our screen to these lines. So for example, if I want these dark grid lines to align to what's going on over here, all I have to do is just kind of bring it in tight like this, and then I can keep zooming in further just to make that everything looks aligned, make sure that everything looks aligned. That's basically all I'm going to be doing for the next couple of minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward. All right, so once we have everything lined up, I'm going to go ahead and do a Control S or file save. And automatically, when you do that for a Linework file from Rhino, it'll bring up this little extension, which is converted. And I think that's fine for now. And then we're going to go ahead and hit OK on this. So you'll notice that because some of these layers are white, some of the lines are actually kind of hard to read. I'm going to go ahead and select everything, noting that our reference Linework layer is still locked. And we're going to go ahead and go to our stroke and make sure this is 0, and we'll make all of this like 1 point font. So what actually might be beneficial is to lock all the layers except for that reference Linework layer, and we'll change this to like a lighter gray, or maybe we can put this as like a color that we don't have in that Pinterest image that I had, so maybe like this kind of lime green. And then we'll be able to really differentiate it from everything else. That might be a kind of a bad color. Let's do like a really strong blue instead. Let's do a really strong magenta instead. All right, we can dig with that. All right, so that puts us in a pretty good spot. Everything should be aligned. The big thing that you might have noticed is that not all these layers were selected over here. So I'm gonna lock this and then unlock all of these. If I hit Control A to select everything on the screen, this layer doesn't have anything on it, so we're going to delete that. This layer doesn't have anything on it, we're going to delete that. This layer does not have anything on it, we're going to delete that. What the? Oh, scene silhouette curves. It's weird that it rendered those. And this one doesn't have anything on it, so we're going to get rid of that. So now we only have the layers that we really need, and we're able to start kind of replicating what we had in Rhino. So we know that this layer needs to be at the top because it's like the top render. So we're going to go ahead and drag that to the top. The surfaces layer, kind of the outline of it, which is right here, that actually needs to go above the intersections. So those are good. I'm going to go ahead and hide those. The next thing up was this, if you remember. So we're going to go ahead and select all of those and drag that layer up here, hide it. Next thing up was the Surface 02. We'll drag that here and hide it. And the reason I'm hiding it again is just so I can kind of deconstruct the drawing and break it down. The curved corner lines, I don't know. Oh, so those are the annotation lines. I don't know why I named it that in retrospect, but it's fine. These need to go at the top because they're annotative. The other grid lines like these guys, maybe we will mess with those later on as far as where they're at layer wise. But because these are showing the most important information, like this is the same as this, then we need to move this actually to the very tippy top. The next thing up was this, let's see, the dark pieces, right? So we have the dark pieces and the dark grid. We want to make sure that those are above the light pieces and the light grid. I usually like putting the grid below things simply because that, like moments of intersection like this, they're kind of implied, so it's fine. And as we hide those 4 layers, we'll notice that we should be up to speed with the same layers that we had in Rhino. So now it's just a matter of fine-tuning stuff. So I mentioned that a lot of what Perry Kulper and Anthony Morey do, they have a lot of soft edges. So what I'm actually going to do is hide the grids, anything that's going to like remain aligned. So like these grids and then these arrow lines right here. If you're ever unsure what layer something is on, you can just click on the object and it should tell you up here what it is. And we're also going to get rid of this layer. I really don't think we need the surfaces layer at all, but we're going to keep it for just a moment because we're going to put a render underlay on that thing. So what we're going to do is create a new layer and call it render underlay, surface render underlay. And what I can do once I'm on that layer, I'm actually going to go ahead and lock all of them but that layer. I'm going to go ahead and hit File, Place, and that should give me the chance to bring up this render. You'll notice that there is a background on it, so I want to get rid of that in Photoshop, of course. So if I go to Links and go to the location of the drawing, I can right-click, open this in Photoshop. Sorry, that happened on my other monitor. Basically, I just right-clicked on the file and did Open With and then Photoshop. I think I've done it a couple times, but in case I haven't, there you have it. What I want to do is use the Magic Wand tool and make sure the tolerance is like, I don't know, 8 or 16. Basically, click on the transparent portion, right-click, select inverse, just like we've done in the past, and then crop it down, and then File, Save. And that should give us a PNG that's exactly the limits of the surface itself. So sorry for not having that loaded up. We're going to go ahead and hit yes to modify it. And of course, it got all weird. So we're going to delete that. We're going to go back to our layers and make sure we're still on this and basically do File, Place, that image. And now it's absolutely perfect. So what we're going to do is kind of drag it into position. Because we have 3 weeks to do these drawings, please take the time to really zoom in by hitting Control+ and aligning this properly, because these are going to be really nice drawings if all goes well. And we'd really like everyone to really spend the time to get these things crisp and perfect. So if we do something like this, that looks pretty good. Something that you can do is actually, if we unlock these 2 layers and we just select that line work, it's going to tell us the width and the height. So it's 1.83 by 1.48. So we'll make this 1.83, and then that'll bring us to about the right size. So that should be perfectly aligned. We can go ahead and delete this surfaces layer now. Because we want to have that soft edge that Anthony and Perry do. And we'll notice that these lines are a little bit thick. So what I'm going to do is unlock the intersections layer and select all of those lines. And let's make them white by going to the stroke. Alternatively, you can go to color up here and just double click on the white. And let's go ahead and make those like 0.25. I think that looks pretty nice. Since those 2 layers are pretty much done, I think they look pretty good. Actually, when we zoom out, it's kind of hard to see those intersections, so I'm going to go ahead and make them 0.5 instead. Okay, that looks better. I'm going to go ahead and lock those, and I'm going to hide them, so that way we can focus strictly on what's going on under here. So another thing that we want to do is start to look at the fills inside these things. So if we look up like Anthony Morey drawing, you'll notice that he does a lot of work with kind of these hatches, like these blue and yellow hatches. So we're going to make those custom. And the way that we're going to do that is by making a new layer and naming it hatch. And we want to make sure that it is below surface 01. And we actually probably want to make another hatch for the other surface below it. So we're going to name this one hatch 1. We can name this one hatch 2. Great. So in order to make a hatch, we're going to need to have a color scheme. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, put it at the very bottom, and I'm going to call it, let's say, reference color scheme. Actually, we'll put it second from the bottom, and I'll explain why at some point. Basically, yeah, I'll just do it first. If we are selected on that layer and go to File, Place, what we're going to be able to do is find that image that we had in Rhino. So mine's this Pinterest 2. We'll make it a little bit smaller. If you shift-click on a corner, it'll scale everything proportionally. Basically, what I want to do is create a color palette. Another thing that Anthony Morey does is he and Perry Kulper, they put little boxes that have each of the colors. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the rectangle tool right here. And let's say if you just single click, I want to make it 1 inch by 0.25 inches. Let's see what that looks like. I like the proportion of that. So if I go back to my selection tool or hit V, basically we're going to notice that it's just a white box. So what we're going to want to do is select that box and go to the Eyedropper tool, or hit I. And what the Eyedropper tool does is basically picks up the properties of whatever you put it on. So like if I put it on this pink line, it's going to change the stroke to pink. Whereas if I use the Eyedropper tool on something down here, it's actually just going to mimic this color and give you the exact translation between the two. So what I'm going to do is, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 main colors on this, we're going to make 4 of these. So if I have this selected and hit Control+, it's going to zoom into that area. And if I type in edit, copy, and then edit, paste in place, what that's going to do, it doesn't look like anything happened, but it actually placed a copy directly on where it was before. So I just deleted that one and then did Control Z to get it back. But there's actually 2 copies going on here. So what I like to do with stuff like this is basically just bring it to the bottom so they're in line, and then bring it down once more, just so there's like a consistent spacing between everything. So I'll do that again, edit, copy, edit, paste in place. And basically use the blocks themselves as spatial references. Alternatively, you can go to Object, Transform, Move, and then type in, like if I wanted to move it down 1/4 of an inch, I would just type in 0.25 vertical, and it would do that increment just the same. But for the sake of showing you how that's working, I did it that way. So we have 4 different colors. We're gonna select this one, go to our trusty Eyedropper tool and make it blue. We're gonna click on this one. We're going to go to, I actually think the red's probably fine for that. And then we're going to click on this one, go to this green, or seafoam green, whatever you want to call it. And then finally, we're going to pick the last one and do something like that. Sweet. Okay, so we're actually going to bring these up to the top left corner. Actually, let's do, yeah, I think that'll be fine. You'll notice that it'll probably overlap with some line work. So what I'm going to do is actually just place it in this top corner. And if I go to Object, Transform, Move, I'm going to move it over, let's say 2 inches, and then move it down 1 inch. Or you can just alternatively play around with the spacing and where it looks best. I actually think it might be kind of nice if it's intersecting with the line work a little bit. And that should set us up for a pretty good shape. If we want to make these fills hatched like Anthony and Perry do, what we're going to do is we want to have a light version and a dark version. So I'm going to come over to these 2 colors. I'm going to use the seafoam green and the yellow as our things that we're going to make darker. I'm going to go edit, copy, edit, paste in place, and then Object, Transform, Move. We'll move it over, let's say, 1/4 of an inch, and we'll move it down 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125. And then what we're going to do is go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. And basically what that means is that it's now on the back part of this layer, meaning this will be in front and this will be in front. So now we can make the darker alternatives of these 2. So if I click on this seafoam green, double click on its fill and just make it a little bit darker, hit OK. We're going to see that we now have 2 versions of that color, and we're just going to do the same thing for the yellow one over here. Maybe it is orange. I don't know. I can't really tell on my monitor, but sorry if I've been driving anyone nuts with me calling it yellow. It's like a, I don't know, kind of dandelion or marigold, but whatever. So now we're going to go ahead and make the hatch itself. So we're going to start with the top one, and that one's going to be lighter. We're going to go ahead and click on the hatch 1 layer. And what I want you to do is create a rectangle that's larger than this layer that we have right here, this guy, right? And then we're going to go ahead and flip it so that there's just an outline kind of out here. And I usually like to, I'm going to drag it out just because it might be easier to kind of explain what I'm doing. Come on. What is happening? Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Basically what we're going to do is create our own diagonal hatch. So if I click on this line tool right here and then click and hold down the shift key, it's going to do the same thing that Rhino does where it locks to different set increments. So I'm going to actually do one at 45 degrees. and basically make sure that it goes through this entire box, right? I'm just going to put it loosely in the corner. If I do edit, copy, and edit, paste in place, and then object, transform, move. Let's say I want to move it over, let's say 0.25 inches. And basically I want to do this a bunch of times. To speed up the process, you can select I don't know why it's selecting that outer one. Copy it, paste it in place, and then move it. Because the last increment was 0.25, we can change this to 0.5, and it'll space it the right distance. So I'm going to fast forward through this as I just do like that really simple kind of math stuff. Okay, so now that we have this all set up, what we're going to do is select all of the line work that we've done, and we're going to go ahead and copy it for the second hatch, so we don't have to do this process again. So what we're going to do is hit edit, copy, and then edit, paste in place, and we'll just drag this down and put all of this line work on the hatch 2 layer. And I'm going to select all of our stuff on the hatch 1 layer and do the object Livepaint make again, like we did for the reference line work. And what that's going to do is allow us to fill in each of these with a different color. So if I go to this guy right here, the shape builder tool, if you click on it and hold it down, it's actually going to bring up a second menu, and that'll give us the Livepaint bucket. And that'll basically allow us, you can see the red popping up on here. It'll allow us to fill in every other color. So what we're going to do is go to our eyedropper tool and select that green, the light green, and then go back to our Livepaint bucket and basically just fill in every other one of those. And then of course we're going to do the same thing with the lighter yellow by going to the eyedropper tool, clicking on that, and doing the same process. I was just panning, oops. I was just panning to the left. You can pan left and right in Illustrator by holding down Control while you scroll with your scroll wheel. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, a left button, right button, and middle mouse button or scroll wheel, I would highly recommend getting one. It is very useful. So this is looking good. It's a pretty interesting hatch. You'll notice that we still have these orange lines, which we don't want to have. So we're just going to go down here and basically just make sure that there's no mark on it, and that'll just leave the hatch. So we also want to make sure that we rasterize this image, which means that we need to go to Object, Rasterize, and make sure that the background's transparent. You can adjust this setting. I'm going to go ahead and use high. I think for something this simple, like it's just a couple of lines and fills, you should be fine on this. If it doesn't work for you, I would go to like 150 or 72, but I would save before you do this full 300. And what that's going to do for us is basically turn it into an image, so we're no longer able to click the lines that were on this thing. So that's good. Let's go ahead and do this other one. We of course don't want the increments to be the same, otherwise the spacing is going to look kind of weird. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of this, and actually we're going to double the scale by going to Object, Transform, Scale, and we'll put it at like maybe 200%. Looks pretty good to me. And then of course we're going to go to actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and rotate some of these lines. We actually, well, first we should make sure that it fits over this outer guy right here, which it does. If we go to Object, Transform, let's go ahead and rotate it at like maybe 15 degrees, just so we get a little bit more contrast from the top layer. And of course that exceeds this boundary line, so that's really good. That's what we want. So we're going to go ahead and make Livepaint this thing. So go to Object, Livepaint, and Make. And we're going to do that same process, but with the darker colors. So again, that's the eyedropper tool, selecting that darker version of the color, and then filling it in. So I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward through this as well because it's the same process that we've done before. So something that's good to know is that once you have these colors filled in, you don't have to redo everything every single time. For example, if I go over to this like lime green color, if I just like spam click or click the same color a bunch, it'll automatically update all of the other colors in that Livepaint to that color. And I can easily change back or something else. Just be careful when you do it, because if you change everything to the same color, obviously this is all going to change if you do that spam click thing. So I'm just going to undo that. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and make the Linework transparent and rasterize the object. So this is looking really wonderful, I think. I think there's a good contrast between the two of these. So what I'm going to do now is kind of... It's interesting. I'll put it that way. We're gonna go ahead and lock our hatch layers for now. And we're gonna go ahead and focus on surface 1. So we're gonna go ahead and unlock that. You'll notice that because they were separate lines in Rhino, they're also gonna be separate lines in Illustrator. So what I'm gonna actually do is go to Object, Livepaint, Make, and then click this little arrow icon that'll swap the fill and the stroke. So basically that's just gonna fill in this entire shape, and it no longer has an outline. And what we're gonna do now is that same rasterize process. Let's see, hit OK. And what that's gonna do is make this an image just like we've done with the fills or hatches before. The big difference is that two images are not compatible to make a hatch from. So we want the hatch to be in this shape, but we only want it to be this outline. So what we're going to do is hit this button up here called Image Trace. And this is a lifesaver. I'm actually going to show you something really cool about Image Trace. If I look like, I don't know, Mount Rushmore, and then just copy that into our file quick. You don't have to do this. But basically, if I hit live or image trace on this, it's going to detect like the darkest parts of the image and the lightest parts of the image. It can be black and white, this drop down menu. It can be 3 colors. It can be 16 colors. You can really play around with it quite a bit. Illustrator is an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to stuff like this. But once we've done the image trace of this, we're going to go ahead and hit expand, right click on it and hit ungroup. And if I shift click on this main black mass, that's going to leave all of the white selected, and I can simply delete that. So now I'm going to come back over here and swap this fill and stroke. And now, as we can see, it is no longer individual lines in like it was in Rhino, but it is one successive outlined thing. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock hatch 1 and bring this over so that it is encompassing the whole area. If you'd like to scale it, you can. I wouldn't recommend it simply because we space these very specifically in comparison to the other fill. So once we have both of these selected, basically all we have to do is hit Object. Let me think for a second. I know the clipping mask hotkey, but I want to show you guys. So it's clipping mask and then Control 7. And what that's going to do is just leave us with that fill. So we're going to go ahead and do that same process for the second hatch. So again, I'm going to fast forward through things. Sorry, this is kind of a complex workaround. Illustrator it's incredibly powerful when you set it up to be powerful. But if you don't really kind of understand what you're doing, or you're just kind of arbitrarily trying to mix and match stuff, it's important to stay organized and make sure that you're keeping on track of all of the things that I'm showing you in this tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and lock these 2 layers and unlock these 2 layers and just do the same process with this other one. All right, so now we're cooking with peanut oil, folks. This is starting to look really nice. I'm going to go ahead and lock those 2 layers that I was just messing with and hide them. Just so we know what layers we still have left to deal with. So it looks like we have the dark grids or the dark fragments and the light fragments. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and unlock the dark fragments since they're more up top, if you will. And I'm gonna do that same make or Livepaint process with these. So object, Livepaint, you can hit Alt Control X, but I'm gonna keep going through the menu. And if we flip the fill and the stroke, I'm gonna make this like maybe it's the darker one, so let's go with maybe we can do like 150 for each of these. And if that's not dark enough for you, then you can certainly change the color. But you'll notice that that line work that I was worried about earlier intersecting, it now disappears because it's a filled in object and it's on a layer above the other one. So we're going to do that quick with the light fragments as well. Edit, or sorry, object, Livepaint, make, swap those colors and make this, I don't know, 200. Great. So we know that those two layers are done, so we'll go ahead and hide those. And I think that just leaves the line work for the rest of this project. So we have the grid light, the grid dark, and of course the curved lines over here. What I'm gonna do, we haven't used this material. Of course, we use the red for this kind of underlay and then these two for the fills. We haven't used this darker blue color that we see down in this image. So what I'm gonna do is highlight all of our line work. If I unlock those over here first. I'm gonna grab all of those, use the eyedropper tool to make it this color. But you'll notice that the only thing that happens is these kind of get filled in. So again, we're gonna hit this and now all of the lines are going to be blue. Because the grid is kind of an underlaid thing, we also wanna make it maybe like 0.5 line weight just to make it a little bit lighter. We might wanna even go a little bit lighter than that. So like 0.25. And we notice that we have the light grid, which is technically underneath, and the dark grid, which is above. So I'm actually going to make that one a little bit thicker because it's closer to the eye, meaning it would be more pressing or more predominant, which means it needs to be thicker. We're also going to hide the reference line work for now, just because I don't think it's going to help you all to see that stuff right now. If we go ahead and click on the light grid layer and select all of those objects, we can go up to stroke up here, and if that's not there, you can go to window, stroke, and it'll pop up somewhere on one of your monitors. We can go to the dashed line option and make sure that it's checked off. And let's do, we can play around with this, but I'm gonna make the -3. And what that's done basically is created a 3 pixel line, 3 pixel gap, 3 pixel line, 3 pixel, so on and so forth. Not really pixel, I don't really know what to call them, but they're dashed lines regardless. And for the dark ones, because they are more thick and they're more in your face, let's go ahead and make those dashed lines as well and make the gap 6 just to create a little bit of contrast. It might be a little bit too much contrast, so I'm gonna bump this down to like maybe 0.375, which is the equivalent of 3/8 of an inch. You can just kind of play around with it until it looks right, and I like the look of this a lot better already. And that just leaves these curved corner lines. I'm going to go ahead and select all of those, and we actually want those to stand out. So if we remember by showing all the other layers, if this piece corresponds with this piece, and it probably means that these arrows are the most important part of the drawing. So if I select all of those, I actually want to make it a line weight that stands out. So let's go ahead and make that like a 2-point line. We'll make the dash, let's say 3. Actually, I think 6 look pretty good. Maybe 9's actually the best. I don't really know. But in order to indicate that this piece aligns with this piece, we're going to go ahead and give them arrowheads. So this option right here, it'll let us scroll through all these arrows. Pick one that you like, but I usually like arrow 9. It's very simple and it's very not squared off. So if I go ahead and hit arrow 9 on that one and arrow 9 on this one, you can see that those arrowheads get added to the sides of the arrows. I think it might actually be better if those colors are red, just so they stick out a little bit more. So if I select all of those lines and double click on my stroke, whoops, there's usually a eyedropper tool within this. It's not showing up for me, but basically I'm going to go ahead and use the eyedropper tool, and then that will erase what I just did, but I can get back there really quickly by swapping this, putting this at 2-point font, opening the stroke panel, going to arrow 9, and making this gap 9. So I think that puts us in pretty good shape, folks. So if I hit Control-0 to center the entire artboard, compositionally, I think this is starting to work. So I'm just going to show all of these other layers except for the reference line work. And I think it's coming along pretty well. We probably don't want this arrow to be in front of this render, so I'm going to go ahead and put it underneath that underlay, and you can see that that line disappears. We're lacking a little bit of the depth that Anthony and Perry use in their drawings. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and I think this will be the last thing that we do on this drawing. And we'll drag it down here, probably below the reference color scheme, because again, that's what all of this stuff is on. And we're going to go ahead and place that render that we did before, which was, I don't remember where exactly it was. More Kulper gray render. Yes, it's this one. So this is going to be kind of tough to align simply because we can't crop it to the shadow because we had a ground plane on which all of this was being projected. So I'm going to go ahead and put this at, let's say 50% for now. And we're basically just going to have to kind of guess and check on how this lines up with everything. So we know that this piece right here is actually this piece. It's basically just like finding where, actually this is pretty close. We can basically just try to align everything up. We can see that up here, you can barely see this, which is great. So if we can, it's a little tiny bit too big. So if we do something like that, so now we can see that, oh, come on. Ooh, sorry. For using that as a reference piece, basically we want to drag it until it's like perfectly aligned with everything. And I think that's pretty good. We can see that this is good. And then I'll usually go to like the other corner of the document just to make sure that everything's in line down there too. And it looks like it's pretty close on that end. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this background render and make it like 10%, maybe even 20%. Maybe even 15%. It's just kind of a guessing game again to get it to work just right. But immediately that gives us a lot more depth, and the drawing I think looks a lot nicer. You can also play around with maybe it belongs more at the top, so you can start to get some of the shading on here. If you want to underneath the fill, these obviously look flat and it's not going to show up. I usually like to put it on the top, but sometimes, you know, obviously if you have it at 100%, you're not going to see any of the work that you just did. So just be mindful of what transparency you have everything at. And I think if we put that at 20%, I really like the look of this, folks. So I think what we should actually do is change the artboard to match this JPEG. And the way we're going to do that is by simply clicking off and not selecting anything, going to Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and we'll just kind of drag it down to fit, because we don't want to have this gross kind of straight line cutoff border at the bottom, right? So if we do something like that, we can see that it's the transparency actually splits the color thing, so we'll have to move that a little bit, but that's perfectly fine. We're going to unlock our reference color scheme panel, select that stuff, lock our render underlay, and just bring it over. And then from here, folks, I think this is looking pretty good, and it'll get you to a really good place. Again, this is meant to be done over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Like, this is not something that we expect to have from you on Wednesday the 15th. So to kind of wrap up, we're going to go to File, Save As. We'll save it as a PDF, please. And then we'll do ARCH221, your last name, and then we'll do final drawing iteration 01. because of course we're going to be checking in with you weekly on the updates of your progress. We want to make sure that Preserve Illustrator editing capabilities is on. Basically, just make sure that these check marks are the same. Save your PDF, and that should get you to a really good place for the final project. If you have any questions, I know this is a lot of information. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, and we'd be more than happy to help you out with stuff like this. So again, the reason that we are making this as abstract as it is because we want to think about the chair as an object in a different way. So by deconstructing it like we do here and reinterpreting it as a background where the object becomes background and the background becomes object, we're thinking about the couch in a different way, and certainly the way that we represent it in a different way as well. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for being warriors and picking Anthony, Morey, and Perry Kulper. I know it is overwhelming, so I think you're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And with that, we will catch you next time.